Hey guys, Bill here from Twin Tiers Homestead. So I want to explain a message that I left on our Facebook page yesterday. We had kind of an incident here and we almost lost a goat. And when I say lost a goat, I don't mean that they got out and almost wandered away. That goat was probably about a minute or two away from being dead. And it was the little goat, Myna, down there. I'm going to explain what happened in a little bit. Fortunately, she's made a full recovery at this point, and there doesn't seem to be any negative signs of what happened. So, very thankful that it all worked out, but just by pure circumstance, it happened to catch it and was able to save her life. So we'll explain what happened in just a second. All right, so I'm down here by the chicken house. One of the things that we've been doing is we've been bringing the goats over into the chicken yard. And there's going to be another video that we're going to put out about our new goat barn. So we're going to be moving the goats out of the big barn and over somewhere else for the winter. And I'll explain in that other video why. But we've been putting the goats out into the chicken yard because that thing has gotten crazy out of control with weeds. And so we wanted to put the goats out there to help them manage that and to get used to the area and to get the goats and the chickens used to cohabitating with each other. So they'd been out here for a couple of days on and off. We usually put them back in their stall in the goat pen area at nighttime, and then bring them back over in the day. Well, yesterday I was bringing, along with Billy, I was bringing down a food bucket of table scraps to the chickens. And I came down in through the chicken house. Billy was maybe a minute or two behind me. And I opened up the door, and the goats were already outside here. I opened up the door and I saw Myna laying over there on the ground in a very unusual way. It's not that she was like laying down like a goat would lay down. She looked like she was dead. And so I raced over to see what was going on with her, and she was essentially, her eyes were completely dilated, her mouth was open, her tongue was out, she really wasn't breathing. And what had happened, somehow, she had gotten into this poultry netting. Even though these are, I think they're about 3x3 squares, she had gotten her head stuck into one of those squares and then twisted it several times, and it had choked around her neck so tight that it cut off all of her oxygen, and she could not breathe. I don't know exactly how it happened. Wasn't even close to happening in the past, but it was so tight I could not get it off of her. And when I got to her, she wasn't breathing. I would say probably every 15 seconds there was a low gurgle of air that either came in or out of her. So, and like I said, her pupils were dilated, her tongue was hanging out the side of her mouth. She was completely limp. And so I ran back into the chicken house looking for something to cut that poultry netting off of her with, and couldn't find something. I started yelling for Billy. He went and found a pair of scissors in the barn, and I was able to finally get her free of that. But it just still, it did not look good. She wasn't breathing, and I ended up having to give the goat mouth to mouth. And so I closed off her nose passages, and I wrapped my hand around her snout and blew into the end of it. And after doing that maybe 4 or 5 times, she started to slowly have some shallow breathing. And I would say maybe after breathing that way for about 15 minutes, she started to breathe a little bit better. And I noticed at that point her eyes started to actually respond, but she was still limp. She was just not coherent. And so I sat there with her head on my lap and cleaned her all off. I tried to wipe some water around her mouth. And I still didn't think she was gonna make it, even though she was free and she was breathing. I thought that she just was not gonna survive. But fortunately, after about maybe 30 minutes, she started to bleed again. Right, so calling out for the other goats, and started to breathe a little bit more normal, but still was not right. And I would say maybe another 15-20 minutes went by that she started to sit up, and then I knew that there was a chance that she could make it. So we just kept her calm and laying down where she was. I kept her on my lap, and eventually, I would say maybe 45 minutes to an hour after I found her and cut her free, she actually stood up. And even then, she still wasn't right. She stood up, but she was walking really funny. Like, I don't want to say she was dizzy, but maybe she was. I don't know what dizziness for a goat is like. But she just wasn't right. And it took a while, but she eventually started to eat again. And so thankfully she's made a full recovery. She looks okay now, as you can see, and she's moving around well, and all seems to be good. It really bothered us. So Billy was really upset. He was out here ripping that fence out, throwing stuff, which I completely get, right? He gets that personality from me. He was really upset and mad by it because it was just something that didn't have to happen. You know, we try to take really good care of our animals. We want them to have a good life, and you know, we don't want anything bad to happen to them. Occasionally it happens to a chicken. Something will get a chicken, and you know, it happens when we don't know about it. But we don't necessarily see that chicken in pain. The few times that something has happened, we've tried to take care of it. But a goat is definitely different than a chicken. A goat is very similar to a dog, I would say. There's just a lot more to them than a chicken. They do have a personality. So, you know, we were shaken by it. Well, the one thing we did is, before I go back inside, is we took all that netting out of here. And the netting was originally there to keep the animals out of the garden. Well, we decided we're going to take that out because we didn't want to risk any of that again. And in its place, we put up this poly wire, which the goats won't get hung up on. The chickens can get through it, unfortunately, to the garden, but the goats won't get hung up on it. And the goats have learned not to touch that because it is electrified. And I should say that the poultry netting is also electrified, and I do have an energizer for it. Let's go back down here so you can see it. So here I have a solar energizer that was connected to it, and it was on, but unfortunately, I didn't know this at the time, it wasn't putting out any power. The light was flashing. It should have been energizing the net, so that should have kept the goats away from it. But maybe there's something going on with the battery inside of here, but it simply was not producing power. We have another one that's not battery based, but it plugs into an outlet. And so no matter what happens, this one's always going to be on now. So we decided to stop using this and pull this one out of the barn, and it's going to work out well. I've tested it. It's got power throughout it, and so, you know, call it a bad combination of somehow the goat did get its head through there and the fence wasn't electrified because there was a battery problem in the energizer. It doesn't really matter. In the end, we almost lost a goat. And like I said, we were probably, if I would have been a minute later, I don't think it would have made it. Let me go back in through here. I'm extremely grateful that it was able to survive. Last night, I didn't sleep at all. I just had, you know, the events unfolding in my mind as to what happened and what could have been and how it ended up being different. I'm glad about that, but you just can't erase that. So, you know, my thoughts is that the use of this type of fencing, I'm done with. It is simply not worth it. That's a $140 fence. I've cut it now. I'm sure it could be repaired, but compared to the cost of the goat, it doesn't even compare. So my advice is, if you do have goats or animals like this, sheep, you have to be very careful about using this type of electrified netting with a solar charger or maybe something else that may bring the charge down on that net, where those animals can get their heads even through these tiny squares. Right? I mean, it's not that big of an opening, but somehow she got her head and her horns in through that, and it wasn't just her head. She was like a fish caught in a fish net. Her legs and hooves were all tangled in through here, and I'm sure that as this unfolded for her, she began to freak out and was trying to do her best to get free. It just wasn't working out. So all I can say is, thankfully, it worked out in the end. You know, I feel bad that she had to go through that. Call it a lesson learned, but my advice is best not to use these types of netting products with goats or sheep that could potentially get their head into one of those even tiny squares. I'm simply done with them. So anyways, that's what the story was. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. Yep, and that's it. All right, thanks folks. Have a great day. Bye.